Everybody have a good weekend?
Yeah,
Do anything exciting?
no.
That's a shame. Well, maybe you can today. I'm kind of looking forward to getting outside today. It's beautiful out right now, Evan. Don't ruin it for me with your rain predictions. But
It's not supposed to rain today.
it looks beautiful out. I'm excited. I don't know how we got here already, but there we go. All right. Well, you guys excited to continue on with some psychological development here?
Yes, I've missed it.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad. That makes me feel good. Okay, well, we're going to continue on from where we left off on Thursday. And what I want you to think about today is, how does a child's thinking change as they get older, as they develop? We talked about as infants how literally the baby can think that you're no longer in the room, that you don't exist. How does that change? How does their thinking become more concrete? And this was really the realm of the study of a psychologist named Jean Piaget, and that's what we talked about last Thursday. When does a child learn about object permanence, conservation, and abstract reasoning? And those thought processes that we take for granted as adults are actually important milestones in a child's cognitive development. Let's take Janie, for example. Janie is 6. She has really curly hair. She's noticed that when she takes a bath and her hair gets wet, it looks longer. She thinks this is really cool, and she believes that her hair literally grows when it gets wet and shrinks again upon drying. She asked her mother one day if keeping her hair wet for longer will help it stay long when it dries. And her mother laughs and explains to a disappointed Janie that when curly hair gets wet, it straightens out and looks longer. Hair doesn't actually grow when it's wet. Now, Janie has trouble understanding this because she's at a stage of cognitive development where it's hard for her to imagine that the same volume of a substance, in this case her hair, can be shaped very differently. And again, psychologist Jean Piaget is the psychologist who really did a lot of the early pioneering work in these stages. And he developed a 4-stage model of cognitive development, which you may actually recall if you took sociology with me. As children move through these stages, they begin to think more and more like what we consider adult thinking to be. So the first stage, which lasts until the child is about 2 years old, is called the sensory motor stage. And babies in this stage learn about the world through their senses. So cognitively, a baby's biggest sensory motor development is a sense of object permanence. Have you ever wondered why young babies enjoy peekaboo so much and then later on just don't seem to really get into it? It's not that fun for adults because we know that when a person covers their face, they're still there. They just look like idiots covering their face. But young babies think that if they can't see something, it has disappeared. So when mom covers her face, the baby thinks, oh my God, where'd she go? It's gone. And when she reappears, she's returned. It's like a magic trick. But once babies develop object permanence at around 8 months, they recognize that their mother doesn't really go anywhere and aren't quite as interested in peekaboo anymore. So Piaget's second stage spans ages 2 to 7, and he called it the pre-operational stage. And Piaget uses operational as a loose synonym for logic. So this is this age between 2 and 7 we can really call pre-logical stage. Children in the pre-operational stage, therefore, are only in the initial stages of using language and applying abstract thought. And they are still not very good at reasoning and going through tasks solely in their heads. Children in this stage are also very egocentric, are gradually learning that others think differently than they do. They think that their world revolves around them. You know, the whole, you give a toy to someone as a gift, the kid picks it up and thinks it's automatically theirs. Mine, mine. So in experiments to test this, a psychologist will let a child watch him open up an empty juice box, fill it with colorful ribbons, and then seal up the box. And then the psychologist asks what the child's mom will think is in the box, juice box that looks brand new. And children at the early end of this stage, around 3 or 4, will say that their mom will know there are ribbons in the box. Now, only children who are later into the stage will realize that since their mom hasn't seen the psychologist tamper with the juice box, their mom will still think it has juice in it. Piaget called his third stage, which he believed characterized children from 7 to 11 years old, the concrete operational or concrete logic. It's black or it's white, basically, is what that means. Children become more capable of thinking logically during these years, and they acquire the cognitive skill that Piaget called conservation, which will eventually help Janie understand that her hair does not actually grow longer when it gets wet. Basically, conservation is the understanding that simply changing the outer form of something does not necessarily change its quantity. And to use a more concrete example than Janie's hair, after children have acquired conservation, they come to understand that a taller, thinner glass can hold the same amount of water as a fatter, shorter one, basically. Piaget's final stage from 11 or 12 years and beyond is called the formal operational stage, or the formal logical stage. And the major accomplishment acquired at this stage is abstract reasoning. In other words, it's not just black and white. There's lots of gray areas in between that you have to consider, other factors and things like that. So children and adults at this stage are able to think through problems scientifically rather than by basic trial and error. They understand that things in the world aren't black and white and think more about values and goals. And they are able to reason through things that are not concrete. Piaget's stages of cognitive development have kind of shaped the way in which we think about children's cognition. And even though subsequent studies have shown that the path to adult thinking is often more complicated than Piaget suggested, it does give us a basic framework to understand the development of their thinking through these different stages. Children can acquire new cognitive skills at different times and revert to previous states of thinking, whereas Piaget believed his stages were universal and progressed from start to finish with no backtracking. Subsequent work has also indicated that nurture, or the social environment in which a child develops, is perhaps more important than Piaget had allowed for in a child's psychological cognitive development. He thought it was all just natural progression. So how do people learn to make morally sound decisions as they develop? And this is something that's a lot different than understanding, like, a bigger, fatter, container can hold the same amount of water as a taller, thinner container. It's about right and wrong now. And how do children come to understand right and wrong? Well, a lot of it does mirror Piaget in a way, but a lot of it is much more abstract. So at some point of your life, you've probably been faced with a moral dilemma. Consider this example. A father tells his daughter, Lauren, that she can have a bike if she saves enough money from her weekly allowance to pay for half of it. Then, when Lauren tells her father she's saved up all the money, her father reverses his decision and tells Lauren to give him the money because he wants to use it to buy beer. On the one hand, Lauren wants to obey her father, and on the other, she doesn't want to support his destructive drinking habits. Lauren is torn about giving her father the money. Psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg was especially interested in how children develop their ability to make moral decisions like this one. And he came up with several stages of moral development that in many ways mirror Piaget, which, though not without criticism from other psychologists, form a good starting point to think about these questions. It's important to remember that not everyone, even adults, necessarily make it into all the higher stages that Kohlberg laid out. People first pass through two stages known collectively as the pre-conventional level. And in the first stage, people are motivated by trying to avoid punishment. Their actions are bad if they get punished and good if they don't get punished. So you're not supposed to have cookies before dinner, but if you can go in and sneak a cookie and eat it and no one knows or no one says anything, it must be all right. So in this stage, Lauren would give her father the money because she doesn't want him to punish her. At the second stage, people are motivated purely by self-interest. Lauren at this stage would likely keep the money, thinking that even if she can't afford a bike, she can use it to buy something else good for herself. The next level of moral development, the conventional, also contains two stages. Adolescents typically operate at this level, the conventional level, as do some adults. In stage 3, people make moral decisions based on getting people to like them. So Lauren might decide to give her father the money because this will improve her relationship with him. But if her mother's upset by her father's drinking, she might decide to give the money to her mother in order to be a good girl in her mother's eyes and improve that relationship with her. Pure pressure, whereas if someone's smoking, they offer you a cigarette, it's wrong to smoke, it's illegal, but you want to be friends with them, and so you agree to smoke with them as well. So her decision would be based on whichever social relationship seemed most important. In stage 4, moral reasoning centers around maintaining a functioning society by recognizing that laws are more important than individual needs. So in this stage, Lauren probably wouldn't give her father the money because his alcoholism is disruptive to the stability of their family and community. Someone in this fourth stage might say, you know, a father who stole a loaf of bread to feed his starving family is definitely wrong. He stole, and he should get the full punishment of the law as a result of that. So the final level of moral development is called the post-conventional. And probably from my example, you can kind of see where this is going. Not all adults reach this level. Many are stuck at some of the earlier stages. Post-conventional moral thinkers reject the rigidity of laws. They believe that they should be ignored or changed if they're not good laws. So in the case of our father who stole a loaf of bread, a post-conventional thinker would say, yes, the law does say you get 10 years for stealing, but given the circumstances, we should probably lessen the sentence, if not altogether ignore this law in this person's favor. You can see a lot of this post-conventional thinking during the civil rights era. Yes, the law did say blacks are not allowed to eat at the lunch counter at Woolworth's, but certainly, you know, an understanding of human nature and, you know, the value of human dignity would make us rethink that and say, okay, probably we shouldn't punish them because they just did what all humans should be able to do. So in stage 5, people will try to act in ways that achieve the most good for the most number of people. And they judge a law as unjust if it failed to do this, such as the laws against, or the laws in favor of segregation in the South in the 1960s. Lauren at this stage would not give her father the money because she'd recognized that his alcoholism is hurting his family and himself. Stage 6 thinkers develop ethical principles and a sense of justice, and actions are taken because they are right in themselves, not because they help achieve other goals. And though Kohlberg theorized that this stage existed, he had trouble finding people who are always operating at this level. And for Lauren to exhibit stage 6 moral reasoning, she'd have to have a strongly developed sense of the injustice of giving her father money for beer. Now, Kohlberg's theories are not without their detractors. Perhaps the best known of the critics is a psychologist named Carol Gilligan. And I think she was abandoned on an island for a long time. I'm not sure, but she criticized Kohlberg's stages for being too focused on boys. When Kohlberg did his study, it was young boys that he did study. And Kohlberg claimed that boys tended to reach the higher stages more frequently than girls as a result, which Gilligan and others have taken issue with. But Kohlberg has remained influential largely because he took the first step toward defining moral values through empirical studies, more so that everybody buys into his whole, you know, morality, conventional, pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional stages of development. So though his conclusions may be flawed and even sexist, his methodology is what is more important. Now, we've talked about all this, you know, the ability to think and everything, but all this ability to think and everything kind of goes into how do we as individuals form our personalities or our definition of who we are that defines kind of how we act in different situations. So to answer this question, a psychologist named Erik Erikson came up with 8 stages of identity formation that revolve around conflict and resolution. In other words, we face conflict in our lives, we think it through, we come to a resolution, and that allows us to grow and advance to the next stage. So Erikson believed that we work on constructing psychosocial identity throughout our whole lives. And by psychosocial, he meant an interplay between our inner emotional lives, the psycho, and our outer social circumstances, the social. In other words, we think about things that happen socially in our lives and come to resolutions about them. And Erikson believed that as we grow in age, we pass through 8 distinct stages of development. And he thought that each stage was defined by a specific conflict between a pair of opposing impulses or behaviors. The resolution or inability to resolve these conflicts affects our personalities and identities. And Erikson defined 4 childhood stages, 3 adult stages bridged together by 1 stage of adolescence. And we'll go through each stage and define it by its central conflict, as well as we give some examples of behaviors and patterns of thinking characteristic of this stage. So the first stage is the oral sensory stage, and that encompasses the first year of life and is defined by conflict between trust and mistrust. So what is the first thing babies will do with any object you give them? Go ahead, I've unmuted you. You can take a shot at this one.
Put it in their mouths.
Put it in their mouths, exactly. When a baby cries, it's in its crib, it's crying, does the parent go to it and pick it up and comfort it, or does it leave it there? And this is actually a huge philosophical argument in parenting. Before the 1950s, when a guy named Dr. Spock wrote a child rearing book, the common wisdom was if a baby's crying in its crib, you've got to leave it alone and let it cry. Otherwise, it will never develop any independence. It will always be dependent on the parent. Nowadays, it's probably considered child abuse to just let a child cry like that it needs comforting. And that's what's meant by trust and mistrust. Does the child learn that the world is, a cold, solitary place where you have to be dependent on yourself? Or is the world full of trusting individuals and that you can rely on others to get things done? So infants during this time learn to trust their parents if they're reliably cared for and fed. If not, if they're neglected or abused, they'll develop mistrust instead. Infants at this stage either learn that they can trust others to fulfill their needs or that they can't, and that the world is a dangerous and unreliable place. And I certainly think you can still make some argument about, okay, are we teaching the child? And trust me, I'm not saying leave a little baby. I'd never be able to do that myself. Leave a little baby in a crib crying. But at what point you can't trust everybody inherently that they'll do what they said, that you have to be somewhat independent and responsible. So the second stage is called muscular anal and is defined by the conflict between autonomy and shame and doubt. And why is it called muscular anal? Because you're learning how to control your muscles, to coordinate your body movements. And certainly a lot of that has to do with toilet training. Are you capable of doing things on your own? Or are you going to have accidents because you can't control your body, and there'll be a little bit of shame and doubt in there? Parents who allow their toddlers between the ages of about 1 and 3 to explore their surroundings and develop interests of their own help to foster a sense of autonomy. I know when my kids were little, in my head, I gave them 10 feet. I would let them go 10 feet away from me, and I wouldn't bother them or touch them. I'd just watch, and I'd let them explore the world. Now, if they went beyond 10 feet, I followed, but I kept that 10-foot distance. I was close enough. Something happened, I'm able to grab them or whatever, but I'm far enough away that they can explore the world on their own. But parents who are too restrictive or cautious with their children can instead leave them with doubt about their abilities, like a learning mistrust instead of trust. This can have long-standing consequences. So I know of people whose parents coddled them and babied them, especially when they were real little. I knew a girl who didn't learn to walk until she was 2 because her father carried her everywhere. And certainly, that leaves a little bit of doubt as to, okay, what am I capable of? Am I just a pretty princess, basically, and not capable of taking care of myself? A related conflict between initiative and guilt defines the next stage, the locomotor stage. And children in this stage, between the ages of 3 and 6, need to develop initiative or independent decision-making about planning and doing various activities to build up some kind of confidence in themselves that they can take the initiative to get things done. And when they don't take the initiative, like, they come in their room, they see their room's a mess. Do they take the initiative and clean it up because they feel confident in their abilities to clean it up properly? Or do they feel guilty that, gosh, I know I'm supposed to clean my room, but I can't? If they're not encouraged to do this, or if their efforts are dismissed, they may learn to feel guilt instead about their desire for independence. The last childhood stage is called latency, and it's defined by conflict between industry and inferiority. And children in this stage are between the ages of 6 and 12, and during this time are starting to gain real adult skills like reading, writing, and logic. And if they're encouraged, they'll develop industry or motivation to keep learning and practicing. If they're like, gosh, you did a really great job on this math assignment, A+, here's your sticker. Well then, okay, good, I'm getting this, I can learn this, and I feel better about my abilities. Or man, you did really poorly on this F, and people call you out and say you're borderline stupid or something. Well, then you might develop some inferiority complex, like, gosh, I can't grasp this stuff. I'm just not a good enough student. And you draw back on trying to learn those things. So if you're encouraged, you'll develop industry or motivation to keep learning and practicing, and they'll start to want to be productive instead of just wanting to play. Children who aren't encouraged to work hard at learning new skills will instead feel inferior and unmotivated. We're halfway there now with Erickson. So around age 12, children start entering the fifth stage, that bridge stage of adolescence. Adolescents are primarily concerned with finding a personal identity, and they may experiment with many identities and express it with music choices, clothing, who they hang out with. I can particularly, I mean, you guys are probably going through it right now. I can particularly remember in high school, am I a jock? Am I a smart kid? Am I a country music guy? Am I a gangster rapper? I had no clue, and so I dabbled in all of this stuff. But if they're unable to commit to an identity or regret the identity they've chosen, they may experience role confusion in the form of an identity crisis. And though what we think of now as adolescence ends with the teenage years, Erickson saw this stage potentially lasting into the 20s and as a key feature of coming of age. So Erickson next characterized the struggles of young adulthood, which came after adolescence, which he thought was characterized by a struggle between intimacy and isolation. Are you going to find that special someone for you that's going to be in your life the rest of your life that you can share life together with? Or are you just someone who's not likable and not lovable and you're going to be alone the rest of your life? So at this stage, adults have formed their identities and start looking for close reciprocal relationships like marriage, but also friendship. And if they can't find such relationships or can't keep them, they may start to feel isolated instead. After those 20s, 30s comes middle adulthood. And middle adulthood is defined by generativity versus stagnation. Are you doing something with your life that you can leave a legacy behind? Or have you not quite found it yet and now you're worried that there'll be nothing to leave behind? So adults at this stage, typically between ages 40 and 65, start to wonder if they've really done enough with their lives and if they've produced things of value. And if they feel they haven't, they may experience a sense of stagnation. Like, what's the point of living life? All I'm doing is living life and working just to get, my daily bread. And, I'm not doing anything of any value to society, anything that I'll be remembered for. Finally, Erickson theorized that late adulthood stage of life is defined by conflict between ego integrity and despair. And adults at this stage, usually over age 65, feel content if they look back at their lives and feel they've been productive and happy. And if not, they may feel despair or like they've been wasting their time and now it's too late to do anything about it. Now, all these stages being said, much like Kohlberg and Piaget, not everyone has agreed that Erickson's 8 stages of psychosocial development are accurate. Some psychologists have accused it of being so broad and vague that it's impossible to falsify. In other words, it's not real science. It's so all-encompassing that you can't prove it right or wrong. Nonetheless, Erickson is especially significant for contributing a fluid theory of identity that can change over our whole lifespan. Which brings us to the great psychologist Sigmund Freud and his structure of personality. So we're going to talk about, when we talk about Freud, the id, the ego, and the superego. Things we've alluded to back in Unit 1, but certainly we're going to go a little more in depth here. The id, ego, and superego are basically the 3 parts of the structure of personality that was developed by Sigmund Freud. Now, you're going to roll into therapy and lie down on a couch telling your therapist about your problems. He's not going to say, oh my God, aha, it's the id, ego, and the superego. They're just not talking to each other, right? That's not going to really happen when you go into therapy. But what does happen is that these 3 personality parts have really kind of entered the mainstream understanding of how we think about internal conflict. So you think about a person who's kind of pushed and pulled in lots of directions by lots of different drives, like maybe, I don't know, sex and food, and maybe they really like TV. These things are all pushing them and pulling them in different directions, and maybe they're not even aware. So that idea is basically based off of this idea of internal conflict between the id, the ego, and the superego. So let's start out talking about the id here. This is basically the childish and impulsive part of you. And if you've ever watched any old cartoons, you've always got Bugs Bunny and he's got the little cartoon devil on his shoulder, the little cartoon angel. Well, that cartoon devil is the id. It's the part that kind of just does what it wants, and it wants things really intensely and doesn't really think about the consequences. Freud describes this as operating basically on a pleasure principle, which essentially means kind of what it sounds like, which is that it's always seeking to try to increase pleasure and decrease pain. Now, as an example of this, let's say you come home and you find to your delight that your roommate has baked a cake. Your subconscious might say, I want that cake. That looks delicious. Now, let's say that you know your roommate's not going to be happy if you eat it. So first you eat a little piece of the corner, and then you kind of have to cut yourself a slice so it doesn't look disgusting. And then soon enough, you've eaten the whole thing. It's gone. That is your id. That's all id operating there. That's what your id aims to do in life. It wants you to eat whole cakes because it wants you to increase pleasure. Cakes are going to make you feel good. Why not eat the whole thing? Now, what it also wants to do is decrease pain. So let's say you wake up the next morning and you think, oh God, I just ate a whole cake. That's really bad. Maybe I'll get some exercise. So you go hiking. All right, let's get some exercise. No, your id says that's not going to happen. That's going to hurt. We don't want to do that. So if you're totally id driven, you'd basically eat the whole cake and then you would not go hiking the next day to burn off the calories. That's the pleasure principle. So let's talk about the little angel on your shoulder over here, the super ego. Now, what kind of controls this a little bit is the other part of your personality that's also unconscious or mainly unconscious. And so that kind of conflicts with the little devil on your shoulder, the id, and that is the super ego. And the super ego is basically the part of you that's super judgmental and moralizing. And what the super ego is going to do is, if you come home and you find the cake, you probably just wouldn't eat the cake at all. Now, you'd see it, you'd think it looks delicious, but you'd say, no, it's my roommate's. I'm not going to eat this cake because the super ego is always trying to get you to behave in a socially appropriate way. And it's not that socially appropriate to eat other people's baked goods, darn it. But let's say instead that you're still a little id driven. So you do. But in this case, if you've got some super ego action, what it's going to do is take that cake in your belly and it's been replaced with guilt. Your super ego makes you feel really guilty when you do things that are not socially appropriate. So if you do something that's not socially appropriate, you get rewarded with guilt, and this keeps you in check. So maybe you go jogging, but you'd also maybe apologize to your roommate, and it gets you to do things that are good and right, and it controls our sense of right and wrong by making us feel guilty. We feel bad when we do things that are wrong, and we feel better when we do things that are right. And that's what the super ego controls. That's all I had for today for you guys. The id and the super ego. We'll certainly talk about the ego and how it balances those two tomorrow. But hopefully you see what some of the major theories here about how people develop not only their thinking, but their morality and their self-identification. Kohlberg's a whole, psychosocial self there. Not Kohlberg, Erickson's psychosocial self. My apologies. So do you guys have any questions today about that? It's okay to have questions. By golly, we're not grading anything here. The whole idea is to get you to think about things. Have you had any situations in your life where you could see these stages operating, like where you've encountered a moral thing where you could see where Kohlberg's stage would come in? Maybe during your adolescence right now. 10 o'clock still too early in the morning? I would have had you at 8 o'clock otherwise.
I'm thinking, like, I have a feeling there is, but at the same time, I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, think about it and see if you can fit those stages into certain things of your life before we get back together tomorrow. And we'll certainly continue talking about Freud's theories tomorrow because they get a lot more interesting beyond the id, the ego, and the super ego. Freud's kind of a weird guy. So if you guys don't have any questions then, enjoy the day and we'll see you tomorrow.
Starting tomorrow, is everything mandatory?
No.
It's not?
No.
Because my mom's saying that starting tomorrow, like, we have to start doing actual schoolwork.
We have received no guidance yet from the district. And of course, with this stuff, this has nothing to do with school. Okay. So what I'm doing right here is completely voluntary. It's through that Facebook page and is really not connected with the school. So as far as the school portion of it, as teachers, we have yet to receive any guidance. Now, I think some of it will come about that something, will be done. I don't know what that's going to look like or anything. So I hesitate to even talk about it because I don't know what's going to be done.
Okay.
Right now, all I know is that Wednesday teachers are going to be meeting with the administration to kind of get some guidance on that. So certainly not tomorrow will things start being mandatory, but
Okay, because my mom's been telling us that like starting, I think it's tomorrow, that like that's when teachers are kind of gonna be like telling us like what we're supposed to do for actual grades.
I don't know. I have yet to receive any. Tomorrow is when the Act of God days technically are over, and
Okay.
that we're supposed to be doing online stuff according to the governor. But as far as our district, what stuff we are supposed to do as teachers, I have not received that guidance yet.
Okay.
So I don't know what will happen starting tomorrow, and actually it probably won't be until Thursday at the earliest that anything happens. So I know today, according to Mr. Ross, he's meeting with administrators to kind of go over how this will look. And then he's meeting with teacher leaders on Wednesday. And then Thursday, he'll meet with all the teachers to give us this guidance. So what it's supposed to look like, I don't know.
Okay.
I will say this, that's an awful lot of work for something that's supposed to end next Tuesday.
Yeah.
For 2 days, 3 days worth of work. And so I don't know what this will look like, or, as far as it kind of hints to me that this is going to go on a lot longer than past Thursday, than past April 8th, I mean. So, but again, that's all my conjecture. I have no official basis for saying anything like that. This is just my common sense looking at things going, this looks a bit weird.
Okay.
All right. All right. Well, so I'll see you guys later. Have a good day.
You too.
How do I get out? Oh.
Are you speaking to me, Jillian?
No, I got confused. I'm good. Bye-bye.
Okay. Have a good one.